This is Democracy,
a podcast that explores the interracial, intergenerational, and intersectional
unheard voices living in the world's
most influential democracy.
Welcome to our new episode of This is Democracy. Today we're going to discuss Turkey, Turkey's evolution as a democracy, as an American ally, and the current controversies surrounding Turkey's relationship with the United States and the countries around it. We're fortunate to have with us one of the foremost experts on Turkey that I know, and a good friend, David Judson. Welcome, David.
Thank you. Good to be here.
David has spent many years of his life in Turkey. He really has a sort of binational existence between the United States and Turkey. He went there as early as high school, later was a college student there, and most interestingly spent much of his career as a newspaper reporter and editor in Turkey. He was the managing editor of the Dogan Media Group's Turkish language business daily called Referans, and in 2006 he became the editor-in-chief of the famous Hurriyet Daily News, which is, I think, the main English language newspaper in Turkey. He left Turkey in 2013, moved to Austin, where he was editor-in-chief of Stratfor Geopolitical Forecasting, an organization that became actually quite famous for its work on this particular region. And he also has been involved with Global Foresight in San Francisco and is now founding, in fact, a new innovative media group called Urbanitas, which has a website that will soon be available, actually in the next day or so, for people to learn about many more of these issues. So, David, you're a busy man.
I'll tell you. Yeah, culturally confused and busy. Yes, right.
Well, we're going to focus on Turkey today, speaking of cultural confusion. And we're going to begin, of course, with a scene-setting poem from Mr. Zachary Suri. What is your poem titled today, Zachary?
Images of Turkey.
Images of Turkey. Okay, let's hear it.
Turkey. You are eating doner kebabs in an Oxford side alley 10 years ago. You are the family friends from bus trips across the entire state of Wisconsin, names that are hard to pronounce to our American tongues. You are some mythical interpretation of Hercules at the Dardanelles, Xerxes and his bridge. You are the lost Grecians of Ilium, the namesake of Billy Pilgrim's urban America. You are built upon the bones of myth, upon the ruins of the walls of Poseidon. You are that time I stayed up late in the dark listening to the news of a military coup on a bridge from 5,000 miles away. Turkey, butt of so many paltry jokes, too many gobble-gobbles, learning about your siege of Cyprus from the travel anchor on the DVD. Turkey, my parents trekked across you in their half-beat rental car for their honeymoon, and my feet still float across the rug they bought in the morning. And now it is stained with hot chocolate and dust. Bedeviler of Bosnia, catalyst of Viennese triumph and pastries, possessor of Palestine, Turkey, Ottoman partaker in World War, collapsed empire, dabbling in democracy, NATO member, taking in refugees from Syria, and Baghdadi was just killed along your border. And it is kind of surreal that you are in between it all, neither Europe nor Asia, not completely Middle Eastern, split, O lost soul of Hati, between continents loosely defined. Split, O longing soul of so many writers, between freedom and tyranny, mixing and mixing like the way the wheels spin on Hercule Poirot's train headed west from Istanbul. Turkey, there are images of green conflict zones on live maps of Syrian dissolution that trace back to you, and there are pictures of you languishing under a sweet full moon in a rooftop restaurant on my mother's dresser.
There's a lot in that poem, Zachary.
I think we could wrap right there. I think you captured the whole story. Yeah, I'm a big fan of your poetry, but you've won me over all the more so.
So how does it all come together, Zachary? What's in it?
Well, this poem was really about sort of the complexities of the issue at hand and how Turkey really straddles so many different continents and so many periods of history, going back even to Greek mythology and before that period. And it's kind of what makes the conflicts in the Middle East and particularly in Turkey so interesting, but also so complicated.
So that's a really great point to start on, David. How do we think about Turkey's evolution in the last century or so?
Yeah, I mean, I think Zach kind of got it there. I think the simplest way, clearest way to sort of start thinking properly about Turkey is to think about it as, throughout the 20th century, as kind of a pivoting back and forth between the modernizing, secularizing forces at the sort of center,
Yes.
and a pious, more conservative hinterland at the periphery. So, the original revolution foundation of the republic in 1923 was really the center moving out towards that periphery to kind of orient it to the west.
And this is the republic that grew out of what had been the Ottoman Empire.
Ottoman Empire, exactly. The 1950, the first true multi-party election, Turkey pivots back towards its hinterland, a more conservative government, really almost a forerunner of today's Justice and Development Party, or AKP. 1960, first military coup, Turkey's snapped back the opposite direction. Democracy is restored. 1960s politics move again back towards those conservative reflexes reemerge again. There's a corrective. The time of tutelage from the military, going to get it right this time.
Right.
That didn't quite work. 1970s was a time of great right-left conflict. 1980, another coup. Then we have after that coup, we have the rise of or the emergence of Ozal, who's a modernizing president in many ways, prime minister and president. But he also kind of took Turkey back to its more conservative, pious roots.
Right.
He dies. His successors take over. In 1996, there's what they call a postmodern coup. The partner in the government at the time, Islamist Party, has to resign and retreat. The forces of secularism, the centralizing forces, take over, assert themselves. 2002, we have the election of the AKP,
and that's how we get the current president.
And that's how we get the current president, exactly. Yeah.
And as someone, David, who lived in both the United States and in Turkey, and in fact has worked as a journalist in both places, it's quite unique, actually, your background. What would you identify as some of the differences in lived democracy between the U.S. and Turkey? Because Turkey is in some ways a democracy, right?
Yeah, it's a very muscular democracy, and it's a competitive, pluralistic place. Democracy is about a lot more than elections,
right?
And the ability for various factions and forces to express themselves are many. I used to argue that, even in the 2000s, when I was a journalist in Turkey, and Turkey had a lot of problems with the freedom of press then. There were sanctions on journalism. But sanctions are not the only way to measure freedom of the press. Right. In those days, there were 2 Marxist dailies. There were 3 Islamist dailies.
Wow.
Competing with one another.
Yes.
There were a half a dozen mainstream dailies. There were 2 conservative nationalist dailies. It was a very, very vibrant ecosystem. There were 3 Kurdish language dailies at that time.
Really?
Yes.
Wow.
Now, was everything a walk in the park? No, it was not. But of course, particularly since the coup before, but particularly since the coup in 2016, that dynamism, that diversity within the media has been all but rubbed out, and that's part of the sort of retreat from democratic principles that kind of define the country.
And in addition to the press, it does seem to me the role of the military is an important part of this story too. And
absolutely.
Paradoxically, in some ways, the military until recently was a protector of certain secular elements in society, right?
Yeah, no, I think that's the military really saw its role as protecting Ataturk's legacy, which was making Turkey, by hook or by crook, a Western democracy. And so it was, but it was a democracy that was imposed rather than one that sort of organically grew up. And that's been kind of the problem. And that's the kind of the central tension that I think defines the modern era in Turkey. And we're just yesterday was the 96th anniversary of the founding of the republic.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Interesting. Right, just on the end of World War I, the creation of this new state. Should we see the retreat of the military as the result of Islamic forces primarily? Because that seems to be one of the big shifts since
Yeah, I mean, it's a little
decade or
complicated,
so.
but basically the Reader's Digest condensed version would be, I mean, the Islamist group that is alleged by the government to be behind the coup was originally, when it came to power, his staunchest ally, the Gülen movement. The Gülen movement really, it had connections within the military. It had a lot of connections. It was and they were very instrumental in what is now regarded as manufactured evidence for the show trials in the late 2000s that really emasculated and defanged the military. The sledgehammer and I can't remember the name of the other one now, but two famous trials that. I mean, at one point, a third of the officer corps was in prison.
Wow.
Sure. Did the military need to maybe take a step back or be restrained in some way? For sure. But the defanging of it was pretty deep and pretty profound.
And how has President Erdogan been able to get away with this? I mean, because as you point out, I mean, there's a long history of the military being a protector. And also there were traditions that had developed over the course, traditions of the free press and other activities.
Well, there's a couple of things I would note. One, good fortune. One, he had the allies in this group that had infiltrated the institutions to some degree. I think that one thing that probably changed was the complexion of the military changed.
Okay.
That the Ataturk's military, the Kemalist military, was really largely, the officer corps were largely the descendants of Balkan immigrants. Very, very temperamentally oriented toward Europe. As the economy improved, and the people of that demographic could aspire to become college professors or poets. Right. The appeal of military
God
academies.
forbid.
Yeah, right. The appeal of the military academy was treated, and you started having more conservative recruits coming up through the system. So the military itself became more conservative over time, and I think that's a big part of the story.
Is it fair then to put President Erdogan, in the category of populist?
Yeah, I think he's. That's a really good adjective.
Okay.
Yeah, and his, particularly when he first came to power, the economic reforms, the healthcare reforms, the housing reforms, he was a very popular guy, and he's now been in office either as prime minister or president longer than any other leader of Turkey, including Ataturk.
Wow. I hadn't realized that. Zachary?
Yeah. How has Turkey's role, particularly as an important U.S. ally during the Cold War, and largely its almost military relationship with the United States, how has that influenced its relationship with the United States and President Trump today?
Well, interesting question how we get it to Trump, but so there's a long kind of band of brothers kind of relationship between the two militaries, going all the way back to the Korean War. Turkey, of course, sent a lot of troops to the Korean War. There's lots of everybody in the Turkish officer corps pretty much at one time or another has trained in the United States. So there's there are some deep bonds there.
And Turkey was a member of NATO. Is a member of
Turkey
NATO.
is a member of NATO.
Right.
But particularly, since the coup, that kind of fractured the military in a lot of ways, and since Erdogan has been kind of refocusing back towards the Ottoman hinterland, where his heart is in many ways, Turkey's become kind of a problematic member of NATO, buying anti-missile defense system from Russia. Not agreeing to the terms to participate in the F-35 program the way the United States wanted. Fast forward, we see, the events of the last few weeks that have really kind of pulled you have the militaries of the two countries going in different directions. I think the military really supports the decision to invade Syria. The U.S. military certainly does not.
Right, of course not.
And depending on what time of day and which day of the week, it's hard to say. But I think at the moment, Erdogan and Trump are kind of aligned. But I'm not sure about that.
So how then should we understand the recent events where the United States has pulled out of, or largely pulled out of Syria, and the Turks have moved in a much more forceful, aggressive military way and have taken more military action against the Kurds? How should we understand that? Is that really about Erdogan and Trump, or is it about a broader dynamic connected to these other issues?
Sure. So Erdogan. Well, let me back up a bit. Everybody knows that the United States, one way or another, the United States wants to if not get out of the Middle East, certainly wants to lower its profile dramatically. It's really been a 40-year war, right? So the vacuum that's emerging will be filled by one of three powers: Saudi Arabia, Iran, or Turkey.
Right.
Turkey wants that role. Erdogan, not too long ago, until the Arab Spring or even into the Arab Spring, was a very, very popular figure throughout the Middle East. That now has changed. His relationship with Saudi Arabia is in tatters. The relationship with the Emirates is in tatters. His one ally really is Egypt and also Qatar, where they have a military base now. But Turkey's been in an expansive mood, I think it's safe to say.
Right.
The Kurdish issue is a complex one. The YPG, as it's called, on the border that was the American ally until days ago, is an offshoot of the PKK, the terrorist organization in Turkey that's been a long-term problem for Turkey.
And just to clarify, the Kurds are an ethnic group that claim a right to nationhood of their own, correct?
Right. Of all the people that have been, dealt a bad hand in the Middle East in the last century, the Kurds would be, high on the list.
Yes.
Now, it's also important not to kind of reduce it to a binary derivative of the U.S. civil rights situation. With Turkey is a very complex. There are more than 33 languages spoken in Turkey. There are more descendants of Bosnians living in Turkey than living in Bosnia. There are more descendants of Albanians living in Turkey than in Albania. The Laz, or it's a Muslim group of Georgians, ethnic Georgians, and speak a distinct language and dialect. The Kurds themselves speak three mutually unintelligible dialects or languages. While there's a very discernible heterogeneous Kurdish identity in many ways, there's not the analogous Turkish identity.
I see.
It's a composite identity, kind of like French identity after the French Revolution. Like, we're all going to be French now, and there probably was a minority of people speaking French.
It's a multilingual, multi-ethnic, multi-religious society.
Sure, it's the collapsed star of empire, as Zach kind of pointed out at the beginning of the program here. Just as the Basque and the Catalonians have never really sought to be integrated very effectively into the Iberian or larger Iberian identities or French identities, the Kurds didn't want to go along with the program to become Turks, along with the Pomaks and the Laz and the Albanians, etc. And it's been a long struggle. they started getting cultural rights in the 1990s. I mean, when I first went to Turkey, the official line was that Kurds didn't exist. They were mountain Turks and spoke a kind of a bastardized dialect of Turkish that because of their isolation. It was just nonsense. In the early 1990s, the language rights were gradually given and then originally Erdogan. So there's really three periods. So Öcalan, the leader of the PKK, was captured in the late 1990s with the help of the CIA. And he, in prison, demanded a ceasefire, which lasted until 2004. That fell apart in 2004. There was a time of conflict and assault. And some horrible things happened and terrorist actions. Up until 2009. That's when Erdogan began the so-called Kurdish opening. And Kurdish television was begun. Kurdish education was allowed in universities. There were a lot of important things happened. And municipalities in the eastern region actually became not bilingual but trilingual, producing all the languages for the municipalities in both Turkish, Kurdish, and Syriac. Because there's a Syriac minority in that region of.
And this is also the moment when the Kurds become a close American ally. Right. In Iraq and elsewhere.
Right. Yes. And in fact, this is one thing that I think hasn't been maybe effectively explored in the media in the context of the events of the last few weeks, is that until 2015, when the Kurdish opening was going on, Turkey was maintaining pretty good relationships with the Kurds in the Syrian side.
Right.
Salih Muslim, the leader, who's now the spokesman, was frequently in Ankara. There was talk of opening a representative office for the group, and that was fine until 2015 when they had a general election and the Kurdish, the sort of the Sinn Féin, if you will, Kurdish political party, got 15% of the vote.
Became a challenge to Erdogan.
And drew a lot of votes from non-Kurds.
Right.
The leader, who's now in prison 2 years, no charges. That's another story. We can do that the next podcast. But but it was after 2015 that then they decided to rerun the election. And that's when the Kurdish opening came to an end. The tensions flared, and the nationalism that rose up after the conflict resumed is really what helped the AKP to win those nationalist votes back that he'd lost because of the Kurdish conflict and kind of bolstered his majority.
So is it fair? Is it fair to say that at least in part, what President Erdogan is doing is attacking the Kurds to build his popularity at home?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely, and it's very effective. I think he's in trouble. The economy is in bad shape.
Right.
He lost lost 4 major municipalities in the last local elections. And
so why does this tactic work? I mean, everything you've said indicates Turks have a long tradition of actually working with Kurds and managing these issues. Why all of a sudden is this so popular?
Well, I think that everybody's tired. They're tired of taking care of 4.5 million Syrian refugees. They're tired of the attacks, by the PKK, the tensions that result from that. And this move into Syria is seen both as a way of clamping down on the PKK. The PKK is regarded, the Kurdish movement on both sides is really regarded as using, from their perspective, the story here, the narrative here is that they were America's allies against ISIS. The Turkish narrative that's been repeated over and over and over again in a very heavily government-controlled press is that they've been using ISIS as a tool to camouflage their national aspirations.
That the Kurds have been secretly collaborating with ISIS.
No, not that they've been secretly collaborating, but that they use the threat of ISIS as a tool to leverage their way to the national aspirations, maybe even statehood that they would like. And of course, I I have deep skepticism about how realistic it is to relocate 4.5 million Syrian Arabs into a previously Kurdish set of neighborhoods that didn't come from there in the first place.
Right.
That resonates very well in a country. I mean, imagine that if the United States had been taking care of 16 million refugees for 5 years with very little help from other places. And they've done a very good job. The camps, particularly if you compare them to the way we've been treating some of the Mexican migrants and the separation of families, et cetera, and inadequate toilet facilities and no toilet paper and no toothpaste, et cetera, et cetera. The Turkish Red Crescent Society has done just a remarkable job of taking care of the refugees.
Yeah, and 4.5 million refugees is a lot of people.
It's a lot of people, yeah.
So David, as you know, we always like to close our discussion not simply unpacking the problem, as you've done so brilliantly here, but also thinking about positive directions forward. How does this broader historical view that you've provided us open options, if not necessarily overnight options, but long-term options for thinking about U.S. policy, for thinking about regional policy?
Well, I think that, one way or the other, Turkey and the United States have got to get along. The imperatives for both sides to find a modus vivendi are powerful. The United States is not going to look to an alliance with Iran as its new regional hegemonic partner. The Saudi Arabia looks like kind of a less than perfect option.
Yes.
I think the long-term forces are aligned in support of a continued alliance, but it's really going to be constrained and it's really going to be difficult. And while I have some sympathy with the issue, the House of Representatives yesterday, declaring the Armenian genocide, passing the Armenian genocide resolution, just pours gasoline on the fires of nationalism.
See, some would argue, as our prior guest Samantha Power has argued, that this is actually a step forward, that acknowledging and holding Turkey to account for the genocide of perhaps 1.5 million Armenians, that's a step forward. You don't see it that way?
Well, I think that coming to terms with the history of the genocide will ultimately be a big step forward. Where I would disagree with Dr. Powers, I think, is that is the history of the genocide is, all genocides are not alike, and the way the resolution passed, it basically gives parity to the Armenian genocide with the Holocaust, and the historical circumstances are very different. And I think probably the most important book I think written on this is by Taner Akçam, who is himself a Turkish scholar. I think he's lectured here at University of Texas.
Yes.
Yeah. And he's a Turk, and he uses the word genocide, and he's not very popular in Turkey because of that, and he's very popular in Armenia because of that. But if either side actually read the book,
right.
And the complicity of the French and the complicity of the Germans and the complicity of the Russians. So the ultimate reconciliation has to take in a lot more actors than just the Turks. But the sort of crude way this comes down, did they do it, did they not? Was it a genocide, was it not? I think sort of puts the whole historical burden on the shoulders of Turkey in a way that doesn't take us toward a deeper understanding of what happened, but rather kind of locks us into position and aggravates the nationalisms that, particularly at this time in history, we've already seen atrocities in northern Syria. Sure. If not by the Turkish army itself, then certainly by the forces that they've sponsored. And I just really wish this had not happened right at this particular point. And I would also make mention that the Armenian genocide resolution historically has not been supported in Armenia.
Right.
It's the diaspora that wants it. Armenia would really like to hold that in abeyance and get a relationship with Turkey going and
Right.
build trade relations and all of that. So it's tricky, and I think I respect what she says. She had the really interesting piece today in the Times. I thought her discussion of the millions, $12 million a year during the Obama administration they spent on lobbying, that's money that could have gone a lot more productive places.
Right. So if I understand your position, David, you're saying that to go forward, what we should emphasize are the continued values and interests that are served, despite our significant differences on many issues, still interests that are served by a Turkish-American relationship.
Absolutely.
And that building that relationship will open space to address more of these issues, such as the legacy of the genocide, such as human rights violations today.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's a good summary.
Zachary, does that sound like something that would interest young people who care about human rights and care about the region and are concerned about Kurds? What do you think?
Yes, definitely. I think my generation of Americans is very much focused on these issues, particularly the different conflicts in the Middle East and how they relate to Turkey. And I also think that the fact that there's so many Turkish immigrants in the United States and across the world plays a major role in how we view Turkey.
That's right. I think one of the most profound points here is that the history of Turkish democracy is intimately connected to the history of American democracy, and even more so as we move into this tumultuous period that we're in now. And understanding that historical relationship can give us at least some motivation for building stronger relations, even as we try to improve the behavior on both sides of that relationship.
Yeah, well said.
Well, thank you, David, and thank you, Zachary, for joining us for this week and for our understanding of democracy in America and in Turkey. This is Democracy.
This podcast is produced by the Liberal Arts Development Studio and the College of Liberal Arts at the University of Texas at Austin.
The music in this episode was written and recorded by Harrison Lemke, and you can find his music at harrisonlemke.com.
Subscribe and stay tuned for a new episode every Thursday featuring new perspectives on democracy.